May 29th, 1996. On the north side of Colorado Springs, patrons of the Aaron Inn, a blue-collar watering hole, are unwinding from a long day of work.
It is just a local neighborhood bar, a local pub place where you would go and meet a couple of friends.
While most of the regulars come to the Aaron Inn to enjoy a late-night drink, 29-year-old Chris DeVoy likes to unwind by working on his pool game.
Chris DeVoy played pool at the Aaron Inn a lot. It was his hangout place.
Sitting across the room is Patricia Eck, Chris's girlfriend, and her co-worker, Courtney Smith. While Chris plays pool, they engage in a long and rowdy night of drinking.
They meet at the bar, they drink till about 12:30 or something like that, and then they leave the bar.
Patricia and her friend Courtney are too drunk to drive. They ask Chris to take them home in Courtney's car.
Christopher Paul DeVoy was seated in the driver's seat. His girlfriend Pat was seated in the passenger seat, and her girlfriend was seated in the rear.
You're ready to close the door, thinking everything's going to be fine when all of a sudden somebody approaches them. They heard a shot, saw Chris slump over.
Covered in blood, Patricia and Courtney flee the vehicle. The assailant takes off running and disappears into the night. The two women run screaming into the bar, begging for help. EMTs race to the scene. Across town, Lt.Joe Kenda is blowing off some steam at the firing range when he gets an urgent call.
The way the initial call comes in is nothing more than a shooting. No robbery was attempted. This person didn't demand money, didn't steal this car, so they're not exactly sure what this is, other than they have a seriously wounded victim. So we drive to the crime scene. When we get there, there's a car parked in front of the bar.
Gentlemen, bring me up to speed.
Okay, well, this is the car.
The two female witnesses that were outside the bar, and my people were in contact with all the patrons inside the bar.
As Kenda surveys the scene, EMTs load Chris DeVoy's blood-soaked body into an ambulance. Detectives notify Chris's family of the situation. Their son is still alive, but his prognosis is grim.
It is a large gunshot wound to the neck. There is an enormous amount of blood.
I can't imagine what he went through to have that gunshot in his neck, and I just can't imagine.
Kenda orders his detectives to search the surrounding area.
The first step, of course, is trace evidence. Is it a semi-automatic weapon? Is there an ejected casing? We find no casing in the car or near the car.
The absence of a casing gives Kenda an important clue.
This weapon will not have an expended casing. The casing is contained within the gun. We're looking for a revolver.
With no weapon or bullet casings,
Detective Kenda.
Kenda needs to interview the two eyewitnesses, Chris's girlfriend, Patricia Eck, and her pal, Courtney Smith.
You know, this is pretty traumatic. I need to ask you a couple questions.
After taking a moment to gather herself, Courtney tells Kenda about the victim, Chris DeVoy.
Christopher Paul DeVoy, 29 years old. He is a resident of the area. He lives less than 2 minutes from the bar.
He just loved life, and he enjoyed everything.
Oh, you beat him to it.
He'd do anything for you. And he was father of 2, 4 and 7. Very proud of that.
He enjoyed things like horseback riding, motorcycle riding, dirt bikes, skiing. He was very happy-go-lucky. Wasn't a person that he got acquainted with that he didn't make friends with.
Chris may be a friendly, outgoing guy who grew up in the area, but as Kenda learns, his life was far from perfect.
He'd gotten a divorce. He had ambitions to go back to school. He was unemployed at the time. He had been laid off.
And unlike girlfriend Patricia Eck and her pal Courtney Smith, Chris was completely sober at the time of the shooting.
You're gonna have to drive us home.
Oh yeah? Want too many shots?
They asked Christopher if he can drive them home in their car, and then he can get a ride back to the bar. He has no idea that's going to happen. He's just in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time.
Kenda presses Courtney for details about the shooter.
Did you see this guy? Could you give me a description?
Unfortunately, she didn't get a good look.
We ask her if there's anybody else with him. She says, I just saw that guy's waist, and I saw the big gun.
You did see the gun.
Tell me about the gun.
Anything you can think of would be helpful.
Well, it's big and it's shiny, and it has a round thing in the middle.
It's an incredibly vague description, but it confirms Kenda's theory about the possible murder weapon.
She's referring to a cylinder in a revolver.
We were looking for a larger caliber firearm, 357 plus, possibly 44, something along those lines.
This is a very powerful handgun, designed to cause grievous injury and death. What is going on here?
Kenda turns his attention to Chris's grief-stricken girlfriend, Patricia Eck.
I am not Detective Kenda. I know this is very traumatic. I need to ask you a few questions.
She is very upset. She has blood spatter on her clothing, some of it on her face. We ask her, how long have you known Chris? Well, I've known him for a couple of years. We've dated in the past. We date off and on now.
Can you tell me what happened tonight?
From her position in the passenger seat, Patricia saw considerably more than Courtney.
She sees this male approach. He has a huge gun. He says freeze.
Freeze!
And he is shot in the neck. He falls in her lap across the seat.
Patricia says she couldn't make out the face of the shooter, but one unusual feature did catch her eye.
Ponytail.
He did
He
have
did
a
have
ponytail.
ponytail, yeah.
And that's very helpful. That's good. That's good.
He had a ponytail. 1996, ponytails on men are not common.
It is a very highly populated military community. There's not a lot of people in Car Springs that have really long hair.
The discussion of the ponytail triggers something in Patricia, and she offers Kenda a bit of information that could break the case wide open.
Then she pauses and says, oh my God, it's Brett Maverick.
Brett. It's Brett Maverick.
He was in the bar tonight?
Well, who is Brett Maverick? He's part Native American, and because of that, he wears his hair in a ponytail.
Patricia tells Kenda that Brett Maverick is a regular at the bar and was there that night. Kenda asks her on a scale of 1 to 10 how certain she is that Brett was the man who pulled the trigger. Patricia doesn't hesitate.
I'm a 9. Oh my God, it was Brett Maverick. She must have said that 10 times.
According to Patricia, it's not just Maverick's looks that implicate him.
She said that Chris had been teasing him about his ponytail.
Maybe you get your hair cut, learn a little something. Be damned if I'm gonna get beat by a girl.
Well, he said something to him, and Brett said a few things back.
Go ahead and make that shot. Say something else. Go ahead.
He had words with the victim, according to her. Now, these are words in a bar. Could this have evolved into a shooting? Absolutely. Here we go. Bar Wars.
The following morning, detectives track down Brett Maverick and bring him to the station for questioning. He matches Patricia's description, right down to the long black ponytail.
What happened in the bar?
Maverick freely admits to having words with Devoy the night of the murder.
We were just playing cool. We were just being guys. It
So
was
he's making
nothing.
fun of you? Making fun of your ponytail, maybe?
It was just talk. I was laughing, so was he. Bar talk.
Making you a little bit angry or anything? You know?
Nah.
Was it serious? No.
He denied.
Kenda asks Brett Maverick to put his denial to the ultimate test.
Would you be willing to take a polygraph about your involvement in this?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I didn't do this. I didn't hurt anybody. I certainly didn't hurt Chris.
Let's go.
But in the course of questioning Brett Maverick, Kenda makes a move that will shock his fellow detectives and cause them to question his judgment like never before.
My men were not happy with me.
Making a big mistake, Lieutenant.
They were frustrated and they were angry. The one thing I'm good at is making decisions, and I made a decision. He's not the guy.
In the early morning hours of May 29, 1996, Aaron Inn patron Chris Devoy was shot while sitting in the front seat of a car with his girlfriend Patricia Eck. While ER doctors fight to save the victim's life, Lt.Joe Kenda and his team of detectives have called the suspect in for questioning. Another regular at the Aaron Inn who had words with Chris Devoy earlier in the evening.
There's a guy by the name of Brett Maverick. He's at the bar, he doesn't have an alibi, so he looked really like the best suspect that we had at the time.
Brett Maverick denies having anything to do with the shooting.
Would you be willing to take a polygraph about your involvement in this?
Oh, yeah. I'll take a polygraph right now.
Let's go.
Raise your arms up.
But as Maverick is being hooked up to the machine, one of the detectives rushes in with urgent news.
Lieutenant Kenda, his lawyer's in the front lobby.
Would you hold off for a second?
While we're talking to him, a lawyer arrives in the police operations center lobby. He reports to the desk clerk that he has been employed by Brett Maverick's mother to be his attorney in this matter.
Kenda knows that Maverick's lawyer will likely put a stop to the polygraph.
Your mom sent a lawyer for you. You want to talk to him?
I don't need a lawyer. I can handle this my damn self.
Said absolutely not. I didn't ask her to call a lawyer, and I don't need one. I went downstairs and I explained to the attorney that his client had waived his right to counsel and didn't want to talk to him.
What do you mean he's waived his right? His mother just hired me this morning. I'm here to see him.
And I said, well, Counselor, what you are is confused. He has the right to an attorney, but you don't have a right to a client.
If you don't have any other clients in the building today, there's the door.
I think this is something I should discuss with my client before that decision is made.
After dismissing the attorney, Kenda and his team administer the polygraph.
You can go ahead and proceed.
All right, stick your arm back out.
During the course of the test, Maverick's behavior seems to betray a guilty conscience.
He seemed to be nervous.
Were you present when Chris Devoy was shot?
No.
He seemed to be very uneasy, obviously afraid about what's going on.
Did you shoot Chris Devoy?
No.
After analyzing the results, the findings are conclusive.
We got the results back. You failed miserably.
The examiner says this man shot your victim.
Our polygrapher said, well, if he didn't kill Chris Devoy, he must have killed somebody.
Everybody's elated, of course, among the detectives working the case, that old Brett here has failed the polygraph. We're all done. Let's throw this guy in jail and move on to something else.
But something doesn't sit right with Kenda. After years of looking into the eyes of cold-blooded killers, he knows a murderer when he sees one.
I don't like this at all. I don't like the fact that he's completely straightforward. I don't like the fact that he threw his lawyer out of the building. All of that says to me that Brett didn't do anything. His whole demeanor is correct for an innocent man.
And even though Brett has failed the polygraph and Patricia Eck's eyewitness account places him at the scene, Kenda relies on his gut and makes a controversial decision.
The machine says you killed Chris.
Brett, everybody in here wants to arrest you. Everybody but me. I'm gonna let you go. And I'm gonna do that because I believe you. Now, I wouldn't be planning any European vacations if I were you.
You're free to go.
Thank you, sir.
A stunned silence fills the room.
My men were not happy with me.
They could make it a big mistake, Lieutenant.
They were frustrated and they were angry.
He turned down a lawyer. I talked to this guy face to face. I know killers. I don't think this guy's a killer.
They believed I was making a huge mistake. I don't trust polygraphs. I don't trust machines that delve into the human mind. I trust eye-to-eye contact. I talked to this guy, and I believe him. Take him home.
Brett Maverick leaves the station a free man. And with him goes the case's only legitimate lead. But after the suspect is released, the hospital calls with bad news.
Kenda.
You know that guy, Christopher DuBois? Yeah, he's dead.
Okay, what was the time of death?
Well, there were some complications, and he's passed away from his gunshot wound. So you erase attempted, and it just says murder.
You know, somebody's looking at the possibility of facing the rest of their life in prison for what they've done. So the stakes have definitely gone up now.
For 2 days, Kenda and his team have been searching for a gunman with a ponytail. But Kenda wonders if he's been relying too heavily on Patricia X's description.
Hey! Are we working with bad information? Because I'm not getting any vibes from these people. My experience tells me eyewitnesses to traumatic events are unreliable. They are overwhelmed by their emotions. They are overwhelmed by fear. I think we're talking to the wrong people for the wrong reason. We're listening to the ponytail story, and we're not looking past it. Let's explore the crowd more. Let's find other people in here.
Kenda decides to make another trip to the crime scene, hoping to speak to patrons who were there the night of the shooting. What he learns sends the case in an entirely new direction.
This is not what we all thought.
He threatened to kill people.
It's something totally different.
What did Christopher DuBois find himself involved in when he walked out of that bar? Was it something directed at him? Or was it something else entirely?
29-year-old Chris DuBois has been gunned down in the parking lot of the Erin Inn. After holding on for more than 48 hours, Chris has passed away. Now it's up to Lt.Joe Kenda to find out who killed him and why.
Christopher DuBois, from all indication, is an innocent victim who's trying to do the right thing. He's going to take 2 women home because they've had too much to drink. And he's going to die for that? No. We need to find whoever did this.
After questioning and releasing the only real suspect, bar regular Brett Maverick, Kenda has returned to the Erin Inn in search of new leads.
Hey, ladies, doing?
In speaking with other patrons, he learns the bar isn't the friendly corner lounge it seems to be.
We learned that there is some narcotics trafficking that has occurred in the bar in the past. That's a whole nother door that's been opened up that you gotta start looking into, going, do we have a drug dealer went bad? Is Chris involved in drugs? Did he talk to a drug dealer?
The bar's owner claims they've worked hard to rid the place of the drug element, but one dealer has refused to go away.
Somebody finally tells us about Donnie, the drug dealer. Everybody knows he sells marijuana. Because of the Erin Inn anti-drug policy, he politely conducts his business in the parking lot.
According to some patrons, Donnie was known to resort to violence in order to keep that business running smoothly.
What type of person's down it?
Just loud, obnoxious, and he threatened to kill people.
You've actually heard him threaten to shoot people before?
Yeah.
We find 4 different people
Where's my money? Get off me!
who see him in a heated argument
No, that ain't cool, man. Where's my money?
late at night with a client
Hey, cool out.
shrieking at him that he's going to kill him and everybody he's ever known in his life unless he pays his drug debts.
Donnie the drug dealer certainly seems capable of murder. But by all accounts, the victim, Chris DeVoy, wasn't into drugs. So what was the connection between Chris and Donnie?
I like the image of Donnie, the fat-mouthed marijuana salesman, who's going to shoot everybody, who conducts his business late at night in the same parking lot where a victim is shot. Now, I also know that our victim doesn't use drugs. But what if he has some confrontation with Donnie about the fact that he's selling dope in the bar parking lot? Get me Donnie, our Pablo Escobar lookalike, and drag his ass in here.
Detectives track down Donnie Zillmer and bring him back to the station for questioning.
Donnie?
But when Kenda lays eyes on their new suspect,
Donnie Zillmer?
he stops short.
I'm looking at Donnie, and he could be Christopher DeVoy's twin brother. I almost puke. What if we have mistaken identity? Donnie is an Donnie threatens everybody. Fear eventually leads to contempt. What if somebody decides to take Donnie out before he takes them out? Our case has just gone 180 degrees. Donnie begins in my mind as a suspect, and when I see him, he's a motive.
You're free to go.
But if Donnie was the killer's real target, then solving the case just got much more difficult.
If our shooter comes out of his clientele base, we have major trouble. We could be looking at 100 people that do business with this guy. How many customers does he have?
You gotta start looking into Donnie. You got to know everything there is to know about him. Who he's dealing drugs to, who's his enemies. That's gonna again open another huge door that you've got to explore.
This, in my view, is an awful set of circumstances. And I just go back in my office and sit down. This is going to take forever. So I'm sitting in my office feeling exceptionally sorry for myself, thinking that this case has just gone down the drain. And my phone rings.
It's Kenda.
Oh my. We're looking to dig something up, and something just fell out of the sky.
Lt.Joe, Kenda, and his men are nearly 72 hours into their search for Chris DeVoy's killer. But it seems that with every new development, the truth slips further and further away.
At this particular moment in this case, we have a dead body. We have a grieving girlfriend. We have grieving friends in the bar. And we got nothing. I don't feel as if we have a legitimate place to go.
It was just a lot of confusion going on, not a whole lot of hope.
But Kenda knows that in a murder investigation, hope can come in many forms. From eyewitness testimony, from ballistics, or even from a phone call.
My phone rings.
It's Kenda.
And it's the district attorney.
Got some info on that shooting.
Okay.
He says, I was just approached by a lawyer, and his client has knowledge of your crime at the Aaron Inn, and he is willing to provide at least one name. Oh my. We're looking to dig something up, and something just fell out of the sky. This lawyer gives us a name. He says the boy's name is Derek Marlowe.
The 20-year-old telemarketer is a longtime resident of Colorado Springs. Derek was also at a party recently, where he heard someone making alarming claims about the shooting at the Aaron Inn. Detectives head to Derek Marlowe's house to interview him.
So Derek, we were told you had some information for us.
Kenda quickly sizes him up.
He's just a guy who lives with his father. He's not an experienced criminal. He's not an experienced loyalist to other criminals. Introduce ourselves?
What happened at the party?
I understand you went to a party on the 29th. Oh yeah, I went to a party. And who was there? And he lays out a bunch of names.
It was all high school kids, except him.
And there's this older guy there. Well, what do you mean by older? Well, he's 24 years old. And what's his name? James Shackelford.
Shot. Get over here, you're on my team.
According to Marlowe, Shackelford was new to the group. But as the only one of their friends over the age of 21, he quickly came to play a key role.
He was willing to buy alcohol, and when you're 18 and you can get alcohol from somebody and you're not looking for him every night, hey, he's your best friend.
But it turns out James Shackelford also has a checkered past.
He was a troublemaker. Kicked out of one home after another.
He was an ex-Marine that he'd been kicked out of the Marines because he punched his sergeant in the mouth. He would say stuff like, oh, let's go knock off a liquor store. Oh, that's it, I'm going to storm the police station and kill all the cops.
Mr. Bad Guy, Mr. Violence, Mr. Storm Police Stations and rob banks. Okay. Is he like number 3 in Al-Qaeda? Who is this guy?
According to Derek Marlowe, most of the friends in their group thought Shackelford's threats were just idle trash talk.
James says we're going to go jack a car so that we don't have to walk anymore. And I was like, okay, sure, dude. I was like, why don't you get me a red one while you're at it?
Derek Marlowe tells Kenda he thought nothing more of the exchange, until he heard James Shackelford telling a far more chilling story.
Well, he's bragging at the party about how he shot a guy in the neck with a .44. Wow. He only has the right wound location. He's got the right caliber. I feel it in my bones. This is it. This is it.
Marlowe tells Kenda that James Shackelford even produced evidence to back up his claims.
I'll do it again, How about that?
Well, he had the gun. He was showing the gun to people.
Can you describe your gun? It's a big magnum. Silver, like in the movies.
Great big gun, revolver. He said it was a .44 Magnum.
He was acting like, I'm a really bad guy here, don't mess with me, I've got a gun, I'm not afraid to use it.
I just remember him making that comment, I've already killed one person this week and I won't mind killing another. And I was like, what the hell is he talking about?
Marlowe tells Kenda that to prove his point, Shackelford singled out a friend of theirs named Nate Morano.
Hey, Johnson, we're out. Okay,
James announces in a loud voice to the crowd that if anybody tells the cops what I've done, this is what's going to happen.
Oh, man, and I'll shoot him again.
And he puts the gun to Nate's forehead and he cocks the hammer.
Whoa, you don't think I'll pull the trigger?
And he pulls the trigger. But it goes click. Everybody screams. Nate runs out of the house.
Hey, you guys go cry to mama.
Can you tell me who else was at the party?
Derek Marlowe rattles off the names of the other partygoers, but focuses on one name in particular.
Kilowitz, Jeff Kilowitz.
According to Derek Marlowe, out of all the friends in their group, Jeffrey Kilowitz is especially close to James Shackelford.
Well, he runs with 2 other kids. One is Jeffrey Kilowitz. I know him. He's 18 years old. And he runs with this other kid who was there named Jeremy Kirby. And James is their bud, and all 3 of them are always together.
Kenda wonders if Jeffrey Kilowitz could have been there the night of the shooting. Derek Marlowe certainly seems to think so.
Well, he said Jeffrey was with him. Really? Yeah, they both of them together.
Appreciate it. This is very helpful.
Derek Marlowe's statement is eye-opening and breathes new life into the investigation. But Kenda and his men quickly discover that tracking down James Shackelford won't be easy.
James was actually bouncing all over the place.
James wanders around town. He's homeless.
With his prime suspect in the wind, Kenda settles for the next best thing. Shackelford's possible accomplice, Jeffrey Kielwitz.
Who is it?
Jeffrey Kielwitz?
Yeah?
Mind if we come in?
Sure.
We're talking to him. And he is evasive, and he is nervous, and he is frightened.
So you don't know James Shackelford?
No?
He doesn't know anybody named James. He wasn't at any party. He never saw a gun. He doesn't know.
We were at a party with him a couple nights ago. Remember that?
No.
So we start playing with him. Say, Jeffrey, maybe you think you're invisible. Maybe you think people can't see you.
He was waving a gun around.
But Derek Marlowe sees you.
But Jeffrey Kielwitz is sticking to his story.
We have a warrant to search the premises.
Hey, wait a minute.
So Kenda searches the house for evidence.
Is your bedroom right here?
There's nothing in there, man.
It doesn't take long to hit pay dirt.
On his dresser are 2 live .44 Magnum shells. We open a dresser door and find a Taurus stainless steel 6-inch .44 Magnum revolver, black neoprene grips, unloaded.
It's not mine. It's not mine at all. I don't even know how they got in there.
Now, in full-on panic mode, Jeffrey Kielwitz puts his hand on the door and considers making a run for it.
What would happen if I ran right now?
So he looks at us with this frightened look in his face and he says, "What happens if I run?"
You want to run, Jeffrey?
And we look at him and say, "Jeffrey, that would be the greatest mistake of your short life. You know we know. There's a woman in that car, Jeffrey. She saw you and you saw her."
What you need to do is have a seat and tell us what really happened.
Caught red-handed, Jeffrey Kielwitz lays out just how the murder of Chris Devoy came to pass.
James was the one that shot him.
Apparently, it all stemmed from his pal James Shackelford's dire financial straits.
Jeffrey says, James starts telling these kids that he needs money. He's been breaking into Ramada Inns and spending the night. He has no money, he has no future, he has no home. He needs cash. He tells him he knows a guy in Pueblo that's gonna buy a car from him. It's a chop shop. And he'll pay $1,000 for a nice car.
There's only one problem with the plan. James Shackelford doesn't have a car to sell, so he decides to steal one and enlist Jeffrey as his partner in crime.
We're gonna do anything, man. We were just gonna take their car.
What happened?
So they go out shopping. It's midnight. They see several cars. They don't like any of them. They walk over to the Aaron Inn. They see a Mitsubishi Eclipse. They like it.
I think that's them right there.
They're standing in the parking lot looking at it when the doors of the bar open and a man and 2 women come giggling out of the bar. They walk directly to that car and they get in. James turns and says, "Let's rob them."
No, come on.
According to Kielwitz, while trying to rob the trio, Shackelford panicked and shot Chris Devoy.
They run up to the car. James produces his gun and yells, "Freeze!"
Freeze!
The next thing he hears is a gunshot.
Kenda is stunned. It appears the murder of Chris Devoy was committed at random.
Random crimes are the most difficult to solve because there's no connection to the victim and there ultimately is no motive. I used to tell my guys, don't worry about the bullet that has your name on it. Be worried about the one that says to whom it may concern.
But Jeffrey Kielwitz has one more confession to make. A confession that calls into question everything Kenda and his team thought they knew about this case.
It's an amazing turn of events. And it illustrates why this case is so disturbing.
Through the confession of accomplice Jeffrey Kielwitz, Lt.Joe Kenda has discovered that the murder of 29-year-old Chris Devoy was an apparent random act of violence.
Freeze!
And the architect of the crime was an ex-Marine by the name of James Shackelford.
Chris was just leaving the bar to take 2 girls home, and to see him just get in the car to try to leave and then is shot and dies as a result of that, just very sad, very tragic.
But as Kenda listens to this confession, he senses that Jeffrey Kielwitz isn't being entirely forthcoming.
You better start talking right now. We know you didn't pull the trigger, but you better start telling us exactly what happened.
So we're talking to Jeffrey Kielwitz. Has he been truthful? Probably not completely. I'm sitting there looking at him, and I said, so anybody with you besides James?
The question catches Jeffrey off guard, and he does his best to dodge it.
Don't ask me what I mean, Jeffrey. It's a simple question. Was it you and James? Or you and James and somebody else?
Who was there?
Well, it was me and James and Jeremy Kirby.
Jeremy Kirby was there.
Yeah.
Though Kenda is surprised to learn of a third perpetrator, he knows from his interview with Derek Marlowe that Jeremy Kirby is also one of James Shackelford's closest friends.
He says he was behind James, and I was standing at the front of the car. Draw me a map. He draws a rectangle. He said, that's the car. I was standing right here. James was at the door, and Jeremy was right behind him. He's at the door.
Go!
The witnesses don't say.
Let's go.
Kenda books Jeffrey Kielwitz and tasks his men with tracking down Jeremy Kirby. It doesn't take long to find him. Jeremy is arrested at a fast food restaurant where he's applying for a job.
Put your feet on the molding and push yourself back.
But even though Kirby is in police custody, Kenda is denied a face-to-face meeting with him.
He is a juvenile. His parents declined to speak and hired the kid a lawyer. We don't get a statement.
So Kenda and his team focus on finding James Shackelford.
The word in the street is that if he gets in trouble, he goes to his aunt's house in Lakewood, Colorado. We have a phone number and no address. We call the security division of the phone company. Where is this phone? They provide the address. We get an arrest warrant for Shackelford for first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit, and we go to Lakewood.
Detectives arrive at the home of James Shackelford's aunt. Guns drawn, they enter the house.
A warrant for James Shackelford!
What are you doing?
Lay down, on your face! Lay down! Hands on your head!
He says, what are you doing? I didn't do anything. You're wrong about that, James. Yeah, he did. We cuff him and take him out to a police car.
James, what did you do?
When we're standing on his tail, all he can do is cry and lie. Not exactly Mr. Bad Guy.
He gave up immediately. He didn't even put up a fight.
Back at the station, Shackelford is sent to booking.
We arrest James and throw him in jail for first-degree murder.
Jeffrey Kielwitz and Jeremy Kirby are also charged with murder. At trial, both are convicted, and the combined sentences total more than 50 years behind bars. But to the surprise of many, the ringleader of the murder gets off with the lightest sentence.
He went to prison for 16 years. The two kids who were way lesser involved got hit with huge prison sentences, and Shackelford never even got convicted of murder.
To this day, Chris DeVoy's parents still mourn the loss of their son.
Changes your life. You know, things aren't quite so happy-go-lucky anymore.
Thankfully, Chris's memory lives on through his children, Jordan and Carissa.
There's times when my mouth is dropped open when Jordan is turned around. And it's like looking at Chris. I can't bring him back. So I have to remember the good times.
As for the community, the random nature of the crime has had a lasting effect.
No one knows what the future holds. No one knows what the next 2 minutes holds. People don't like to think about that because it's frightening. What's Christopher doing? Engaging in an act of kindness. 3 people wandering around in the dark somehow find him. People find that to be terrifying.
The night didn't scream. It whispered. A Florida highway breathing heat into the dark, cicadas rattling like static. A car idling too long at the edge of a rest stop where nothing ever happened, until it did. By sunrise, a woman was gone, and the state would spend the next 20 years pretending the silence meant nothing. Florida, 2004. The year of hurricane names and blinking amber alerts, of roadside motels with flickering vacancy signs and palm fronds scraping at windows like fingernails. The place was ordinary enough to disappear in. A stretch of asphalt between a gas station and a marsh, a town whose biggest news came wrapped in weather maps and high school scores. Then the phone rang at 6:12 a.m., and a mother learned how quickly a life could slip between minutes. Her name, say it once, because it matters, was Elena Morales. 29 years old. A medical assistant who worked double shifts, who laughed loud and drove too fast and kept a spare pair of shoes in the trunk, because Florida rain came out of nowhere. She was last seen the night before, leaving a late dinner with co-workers, the neon glow of a diner clinging to her rearview mirror, as she pulled onto State Road 17. She texted her sister at 9:43 p.m., home soon. She never arrived. By morning, the car was found. Driver's door ajar. Purse on the passenger seat. Phone gone. The engine cold, the radio tuned to a talk station murmuring about traffic and storms that never hit. No skid marks. No broken glass. No blood. Just absence, laid out neat as a crime scene that didn't want to be one. The sheriff's office did what it always did first. They measured. They photographed. They asked neighbors if they heard anything, saw anything, felt anything. They didn't. The rest stop was quiet, too quiet, a place where people paused and left without leaving marks. A deputy noted a footprint in the damp sand near the tree line, but Florida sand eats footprints for breakfast. By noon, the sun had erased it. Cold case headlines hadn't arrived yet. This was still fresh, still hot, still fixable. Detectives traced Elena's last hours like beads on a string. The diner, the gas station, where she bought coffee at 9:17 p.m., the toll booth camera that caught her license plate at 9:31, the empty road after that. They pulled phone records, pinged towers, knocked on doors. They found nothing that stuck. No ransom call. No credit card activity. No body. The community leaned in. Flyers bloomed on telephone poles. Candlelight gathered in the park, wax pooling on the grass like pale scars. Local news ran her photo on a loop, dark hair pulled back, eyes steady, a half-smile that felt like a promise. Mysterious disappearance shocks community, the Chiron read, and the word mysterious did heavy lifting for days. Then the whispers started. They always do. Someone said Elena argued with a man at the diner. Someone else swore they saw a white van. A trucker claimed a scream cut through the night at the rest stop, thin as a wire. None of it lined up. None of it held. Weeks passed. Heat thickened. The search widened into marsh and scrub, into water that swallowed light. Divers found nothing but tires and bottles and the long memory of Florida's past. The dogs lost the scent at the tree line. The trail went cold, and with it, the patience of a system built for endings. By fall, the case slipped to the back of the board. Files fattened. Leads thinned. The detectives who cared carried it home with them, a quiet weight that didn't clock out. One of them, Detective Mark Hale, circled the same detail over and over, the phone gone. Not dropped. Not left. Taken. Intentional. He wrote it on a yellow pad, until the ink bled through. Phone removed suggests control. He underlined it twice. But control cuts both ways. Without the phone, there were no messages after 9:43. No calls. No breadcrumbs. The night closed behind Elena like a door that locked itself. Years crept in. The diner changed owners. The rest stop got a new sign. The flyers curled and fell. Elena's mother kept her room the same, dusted the picture frames, listened for a car in the driveway at night. Birthdays became memorials in disguise. Holidays grew edges. The case officially cooled in 2007. That word, cold, landed like a verdict without a trial. Evidence boxed. Witnesses moved. The board erased and repainted. Florida had other things to worry about. And then, quietly, something refused to stay buried. In 2013, a clerk in a pawn shop 2 counties away flagged an old phone that shouldn't have been there. A flip phone, scratched, battery swollen, the kind people stopped caring about when glass screens took over. It had been sold years earlier, the record said, by a man with a forgettable name and a habit of moving. The serial number matched Elena's. It had never been turned on. The discovery didn't explode. It simmered. The pawn shop lead went nowhere fast. The seller was gone. The camera footage had looped and erased itself 1,000 times since. But the phone's reappearance bent the case just enough to let air in. It meant someone had kept it. It meant time had passed with intent. Detective Hale had retired by then, the case packed into his bones. He heard about the phone through an old partner, and drove back to the office on a humid afternoon that smelled like rain. He stood in the evidence room and stared at the box like it might breathe. He thought about control again. He thought about the rest stop. He thought about a footprint that vanished. The file reopened in 2014, unofficially at first, then with a stamp that carried weight. Florida 2004 disappearance reopened. The headline ran small, tucked beneath a hurricane watch, but it was enough to stir the old currents. Reporters called. True crime forums dug. Names resurfaced. Detectives re-interviewed witnesses who'd aged and softened and forgotten. They pulled DNA from the purse, the door handle, the seatbelt latch. Touch DNA bloomed with possibility, and died in the lab, a garden of partials that matched no one in the system. They reran toll footage with better software, teased faces from pixels, chased ghosts in motion blur. Nothing broke. But patterns emerged when they widened the lens. 2 other disappearances, same year, same corridor. Different towns. Different women. Similar timing. Night drives. Rest stops. Cars left behind. The details didn't mirror, they rhymed. A task force formed. Old maps came down from hooks, their creases memorizing roads that had changed names. A profiler sketched a shape in negative space. Opportunistic. Patient. Familiar with the corridor. Someone who knew where people paused and when they were alone. Someone who took phones. They combed arrest records, trucking logs, service calls. They knocked on doors that hadn't been opened in years. A man in a faded polo admitted he'd worked the rest stop that summer, nights mostly, fixing lights that burned out too often. He couldn't remember faces. He remembered mosquitoes. His alibi drifted. Another name surfaced in a tip line call that crackled with age. A woman's voice, careful, said she'd heard something back then, a rumor at a backyard barbecue, a joke that wasn't funny about a girl who wouldn't be missed. The name she gave had moved out of state in 2005. He had a record for theft. Assault. No disappearances. He denied knowing Elena. He passed a polygraph that meant nothing. The reopened case pressed on, fueled by technology and stubbornness. Ground-penetrating radar traced empty lots. Cadaver dogs circled wetlands. A partial fingerprint from the driver's door, overlooked, degraded, found a tentative match in a database expanded by years of arrests. The match pointed to a man who'd died in 2010. The lead collapsed under scrutiny. The print wasn't clean enough. The man had been in another county that night. The door shut again. For the community, the reopening reopened wounds. Old suspicions flared. New ones bloomed. The rest stop became a symbol, then a superstition. Parents warned daughters. Truckers chose different exits. The road learned a new kind of memory. Elena's family learned to live with the echo. Her sister spoke to reporters with a steadiness that came from exhaustion. "We just want to know," she said, and the sentence held every version of the truth, alive, dead, somewhere in between. By 2018, the task force thinned. Grants ended. The case stayed open on paper, breathing shallow. Then, a storm unearthed something it shouldn't have. Floodwaters peeled back a section of marsh less than a mile from the rest stop, exposing debris that had slept for years. Among it, a shoe. Women's. Size 7. The brand Elena favored. The lab could say only what it could say. The shoe had been there a long time. Too long. No DNA survived the water. No bone. No certainty. But the shoe pulled the past into the present with a hook that didn't let go. Today, the file remains open. The phone sits in evidence, still silent. The road still hums. Florida keeps its secrets well, folding them into heat and rain until they feel like part of the landscape. Somewhere between the diner's neon and the marsh's breath, a moment waits to be understood. And until it is, the night that whispered in 2004 keeps whispering, asking the same question it always has, soft and relentless: what happened on that road, and who decided that silence was enough? Time does strange things to silence. It stretches it, thins it, teaches people how to live inside it without screaming. By the time the shoe surfaced from the marsh, most of Florida had forgotten Elena Morales, but forgetting is never total. It leaves a residue, a faint outline where something used to be, and when the water pulled back the mud and revealed that small, ordinary object, the outline darkened again. A shoe is not a body. A shoe is not proof. But it is an accusation. It says someone stood here once. It says someone left without finishing the story. Detectives walked the marsh in boots heavy with water, the air thick enough to chew. The place smelled like rot and sun and old storms. They marked coordinates, photographed angles, bagged debris that looked like nothing and might be everything. The shoe went into evidence beside the phone, 2 artifacts of a life interrupted, 2 reminders that the case wasn't dead, just waiting. Word leaked. It always does. The headline ran louder this time. New clue found near site of 2004 disappearance. People clicked. Comment sections filled with certainty. Everyone had a theory. None of them matched the mud under the investigators' fingernails. The task force shifted its posture. Less hope, more pressure. They pulled aerials from 2004, scanned for changes in the marsh's shape, overlaid flood maps like transparent scars. The water had moved things. The land had swallowed others. If there was more, it might be anywhere along a corridor that breathed and shifted for years. They brought in specialists who spoke in probabilities and grids, who warned against expecting neat endings. Florida did not do neat. They went back to the rest stop with fresh eyes. Not as a place where something happened, but as a place where something could. They watched traffic patterns, the way cars peeled off at night, the way headlights swept the trees. They timed how long someone could stand unseen between arrivals. They counted seconds. They imagined hands on a door handle. They imagined control. Control kept surfacing, a word that refused to fade. Whoever took Elena's phone knew enough to remove it. Whoever left her purse knew enough to avoid attention. The car sat just wrong, close enough to suggest she intended to return, far enough from the lights to invite shadow. It wasn't a random smash and grab. It wasn't panic. It was choice. Profiles evolved. The offender, if there was one, was comfortable in transitional spaces. Not home. Not work. Places people passed through without looking back. Rest stops. Gas stations. Corridors. Someone who blended into the background of motion. Someone who didn't need to rush. They chased that idea through records that felt endless. Maintenance crews. Tow truck drivers. Night shift contractors. People whose jobs put them in liminal hours. One name, buried in a subcontractor list from 2004, rose and fell twice, before sticking just enough to itch. He had worked lights along the corridor that summer. He had been fired for theft. He had moved states after a bar fight that ended in handcuffs. He was alive. He was hard to find. When they did find him, he was older and smaller than the picture in the file. His hair had retreated. His voice shook when they said Elena's name. He denied knowing her. He denied being at the rest stop that night. He denied everything with the weary precision of a man who had practiced denial. His alibi leaned on a friend who'd died years earlier. There was no evidence to hold him. He walked. The file grew heavier. The community watched from the outside, hope rising and falling like a bad tide. For Elena's mother, the reopened case became a second job. She learned acronyms. She learned patience she didn't want. She learned how to speak in public without breaking. She taped the new headlines to the fridge beside the old ones, a timeline of waiting. In 2019, technology offered a different promise. Genetic genealogy had cracked cases that had slept longer than this one. The task force sent samples again, squeezing possibility from the purse, the door, the shoe. Partial profiles emerged, fragments of strangers brushing past a life. They uploaded what they could, waited for matches that didn't come. Florida's heat had done its work. Time had chewed the edges. Then a call came in that sounded wrong in the way truth sometimes does. A woman in her 50s, living in a trailer park off a different highway, said she recognized Elena's photo from the news. Not as a victim. As a passenger. She described giving a ride to a woman who looked like her years ago, hitching near a rest stop, saying she needed to get north. The timeline wobbled. The description wasn't perfect. The memory was old and possibly borrowed. But the woman insisted on one detail that made detectives lean forward: the hitchhiker had no phone. She asked to borrow one. They chased the lead through maps and calendars, trying to reconcile years with miles. The woman's recollection placed the ride weeks after Elena vanished. If true, it cracked the case open into a different shape. Alive, then. Moving. But memory is a trickster, and the mind fills gaps with the stories it hears. When they pressed for corroboration, the trail dissolved. No tolls. No receipts. No witnesses. The idea lingered anyway, a ghost that refused to leave. Pressure built inside the task force, a familiar strain between belief and proof. They held meetings where silence did most of the talking. They argued about resource allocation, about when to stop digging in one place and start in another. They circled the same facts until they felt new and then old again. Somewhere in the repetition, a junior analyst noticed a pattern no one had articulated out loud. Phones weren't just missing in the other cases that rhymed. They were recovered years later, too. Pawned. Traded. Always powered off. Always distant from where the women disappeared. The pattern didn't name a person. It named a habit. They built a list of pawn shops along the corridor, pulled records that went back farther than most databases liked. Paper met ink. Ink met dust. Names repeated. One did more than repeat. He appeared as a buyer in 2006, a seller in 2008, a witness in an unrelated theft in 2009. He lived light. He moved often. He knew how to erase himself without disappearing. When detectives knocked, he didn't answer. They waited. They watched. They learned he worked nights, that he drove a vehicle old enough to blend in anywhere. They got a warrant for trash. The bags yielded little: food wrappers, receipts, a broken charger that fit a model from the early 2000s. Not enough. Never enough. They brought him in for a conversation anyway. He smiled too quickly. He talked too much. He denied knowing Elena, but corrected a detail no one had offered. He said he hated rest stops. He said he never went there. The room felt smaller when he said it. Still, evidence is stubborn. Suspicion is not proof. He left the building and drove away. The case stayed open and restless. Years layered on. Another hurricane. Another grant. Another detective rotated out. The reopened file learned how to endure. Elena's name stayed on a board that refused to be erased, a reminder that some stories don't end when you want them to. On the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, the community gathered again, smaller and grayer. Candles flickered against the same wind. A reporter asked the same question, softer this time. Do you still have hope? Elena's sister looked at the road beyond the park, the one that led out of town and into everything else. Hope isn't the right word, she said. We have memory. Memory is dangerous. It keeps cases alive. It makes silence loud. Somewhere, someone else remembered that night too, remembered a choice made in shadow, remembered a phone switched off and kept. The reopened case had not delivered answers, but it had delivered something else, a sense that the story was still moving, even if no one could see how. As dusk settled over the corridor, traffic hummed its endless song. Headlights swept the trees. The rest stop lights buzzed and held. The marsh breathed. And in that ordinary, unremarkable stretch of Florida, the absence that began in 2004 remained, pressing against the present, waiting for the smallest crack, the slightest mistake, the one detail that would finally refuse to stay quiet. Silence isn't empty. It's crowded with things people don't say out loud. By the time the case crossed its second decade, investigators had learned to listen to what wasn't there, the missing calls, the absent witnesses, the gaps that felt intentional. Florida's heat didn't just fade evidence, it warped memory, softened edges, made certainty feel like arrogance. And yet, the reopened file kept accumulating weight, not from answers, but from pressure. Pressure does funny things to people. It makes some talk. It makes others vanish. In early spring, a tip came in through a back channel, not the hotline. A retired dispatcher, sorting boxes in a garage, found a notebook she shouldn't have kept. Spiral-bound. Labeled with dates from 2004. Inside, shorthand notes from late-night calls that never made it into the official system, hang-ups, wrong numbers, static-laced whispers that didn't meet the threshold for reports. One entry sat crooked on the page, underlined twice without explanation. Female voice. Crying. Location unclear. Mentions road. Mentions water. The timestamp put it within hours of Elena's disappearance. The dispatcher couldn't explain why she'd underlined it back then. She said the voice stayed with her, the way some voices do, slipping into dreams uninvited. She said she'd tried to find the call later and couldn't. The tape was gone. The system had rolled. It was nothing, officially. Everything, unofficially. The task force treated it like glass. They didn't announce it. They didn't promise anything. They traced the call path as best they could, chasing infrastructure that had been upgraded, dismantled, forgotten. Old cell towers gave up little. Landlines less. The call might have come from a payphone near the corridor, the kind that existed once and then didn't. Another vanishing point. Still, the idea mattered. A voice. Alive. Afraid. Close to water. They returned to the marsh again, this time with a different question. Not where would someone hide something, but where would someone wait? Waiting implies time. Time implies confidence. Confidence implies familiarity. They studied satellite images for footpaths that appeared and disappeared with seasons, places where someone could stand unseen and listen to traffic decide for them. The shoe's location began to feel less like a destination and more like a marker. Not where it ended. Where it turned. New interviews followed old rhythms. Detectives sat across from people who had been young then and were not now, who swore they'd never forgotten and then proved they had. A former gas station clerk remembered a man who lingered, bought nothing, watched cars come and go. A trucker remembered headlights flashing twice, a signal maybe, or maybe just fatigue. A woman remembered seeing Elena's car earlier that night, or a car like it, which mattered until it didn't. The reopened case did something else, too. It attracted attention from people who didn't belong to it. Letters arrived. Emails. Confessions that dissolved under scrutiny. Men who wanted to be monsters because monsters are remembered. Women who wanted closure for reasons that weren't Elena's. The noise rose. The signal stayed faint. Then, unexpectedly, the signal sharpened. A forensic accountant embedded with the task force noticed a pattern in financial records that had been skimmed before and dismissed. Small transactions. Prepaid cards. Cash reloads. Not tied to Elena directly, but clustered around the same dates, the same exits, the same pawn shops. Someone was funding movement without leaving a trail. Someone understood systems well enough to step between them. The name surfaced again. The man with the too quick smile. The one who corrected details he shouldn't have known. This time, the picture filled in around him. He'd used prepaid cards in 2004 and stopped abruptly weeks after Elena vanished. He'd sold items at pawn shops under variations of his name. He'd moved states twice in a year, each time closer to water. Detectives built a case that existed mostly in negative space. No weapon. No body. No confession. Just habits. Just timing. Just the echo of control. They brought him in again, older now, more careful. They asked better questions. They let silence do the work. He denied. He deflected. He smiled less. At one point, a detective slid a photo across the table, not Elena, but the rest stop at night, lights buzzing, trees leaning in. The man looked at it a beat too long. His jaw tightened. He said nothing. Silence again, doing what it does best. They couldn't hold him. Not yet. They watched him instead. Surveillance is patient in a way people aren't. Weeks passed. He went to work. He went home. He went nowhere near the corridor. He behaved like someone who knew eyes were on him. The task force felt the familiar frustration coil tight. They were close to something they couldn't touch. The case teetered between momentum and collapse. Then the water gave up something else. A fisherman, knee-deep near a culvert farther south, snagged his line on debris that didn't move. He cursed, tugged, and pulled free a bundle wrapped in plastic that had no business surviving that long. Inside, degraded but intact enough to tell a story, was a piece of fabric. Not clothing. Upholstery. From a car seat. The lab worked carefully, reverently. Fibers matched the interior of Elena's vehicle. How the piece had traveled miles downstream, without disintegrating, was a question for another time. The fact that it had was enough. The car wasn't just abandoned. It had been altered. Something had happened inside it that required removal. The narrative shifted, hard and fast. Not a chance encounter. Not a voluntary disappearance. Violence without witnesses leaves a signature in absence, and the case now had a clearer outline. The task force requested warrants with a confidence they hadn't felt in years. They searched the suspect's old residences, places he'd lived briefly and left quietly. They dug through crawl spaces and under sheds. They found nothing that would make headlines. They found enough to make a prosecutor pause. In the meantime, the community reacted the way communities do when the past threatens to explain itself. Fear flared. Old arguments resurfaced. People remembered where they'd been that night and said it louder than necessary. The rest stop closed for renovations that felt suspiciously timed. Elena's family watched from the edge of the storm. They were careful with hope now. They knew what it did when it fell. As summer leaned in, the task force convened one last time, before budgets decided things for them. They laid out the evidence like a map of shadows. The phone. The shoe. The fabric. The habits. The silence. It was compelling. It was incomplete. They voted to keep pushing. The suspect sensed it. He hired a lawyer. He moved again, this time to a place that felt like a challenge. He didn't run. He waited. Waiting, again, as if time itself were a shield. The reopened case had become something else, not just a search for Elena, but a test of endurance. Could a system built for closure tolerate an open wound long enough to heal it properly? Could memory outlast avoidance? On a humid night not unlike the one in 2004, Detective Hale, long retired, drove the corridor alone. He parked at the rest stop and listened to the insects fill the dark. He imagined a voice on a line, crying, mentioning water. He imagined a phone switched off, a choice made with certainty. He imagined Elena stepping into shadow, trusting a moment she shouldn't have had to question. The road didn't answer. It never does. Somewhere between evidence and belief, the truth waited, patient as the marsh, shifting just enough to stay hidden. And as long as it did, the reopened case would remain what it had always been, a story without an ending, a silence that refused to be empty, and a question that Florida, in all its heat and motion, still couldn't outrun. By now, the case had a rhythm, and everyone involved could feel it when that rhythm changed. It was subtle at first, like a missed step in a familiar song. A delay in a report. A call not returned as quickly as before. The kind of shift that meant someone, somewhere, was adjusting their behavior. That alone was not evidence. But it was movement, and movement mattered. The suspect's lawyer began sending letters, carefully worded, politely aggressive, reminding the task force of boundaries, of rights, of the absence of charges. The letters said nothing new. What mattered was their timing. They arrived after surveillance ended, after the searches concluded, after the last warrant expired. Protection, it seemed, had been requested a little too early, a little too urgently. Detectives reread interview transcripts with that in mind. They slowed down the recordings, listened for breath patterns, for hesitation masked as confidence. In one exchange, the suspect described the rest stop lights in detail, how they buzzed, how one flickered on humid nights. That detail had never been public. It had never been shared in the room. It lived only in old reports and older memories. When confronted, he shrugged, said everyone knew that. Everyone didn't. Still, prosecutors want clean lines. They want bodies and dates and weapons. They want juries to feel safe choosing certainty. This case offered none of that. It offered implication, habit, silence. It offered Florida. So the task force did what it had learned to do best. It waited, but it waited loudly. They leaked nothing, but they let the reopened status stand. They kept Elena's name alive in small ways, grant applications, training seminars, cold case workshops where her photo appeared on slides under headings like unresolved and still active. They let the suspect know, without saying it, that time was no longer on his side. Time, as it turned out, had its own agenda. In late autumn, a construction crew broke ground near an old service road scheduled to be widened. The road hadn't existed in 2004 the way it did now. Back then, it was a strip of packed dirt, barely used, swallowed by weeds. The crew hit something solid just beneath the surface. Not a pipe. Not rock. They stopped, called it in. What they found was not a body. It was worse, in some ways. It was a shallow pit, collapsed inward, lined with plastic degraded into ribbons. Inside, fragments. Indistinct. Unidentifiable by sight alone. Enough to halt work. Enough to bring the task force running. The forensic response was careful, almost ceremonial. The ground gave up what it had slowly, reluctantly. Bone fragments emerged, bleached and broken by time, scattered by animals and water. There was no full skeleton, no neat arrangement. Whatever had been here had not been meant to be found. The location sat just beyond the marsh, close enough to water to mislead, far enough to avoid discovery for years. The lab worked through the winter. Teeth were missing. DNA was partial. The fragments could not say who they belonged to, only that they were human, female, adult. The margins of possibility narrowed and widened at the same time. The bones could be Elena. They could also be someone else, another story never told. Florida kept its options open. The media didn't. Headlines surged back with force. Human remains found near site of 2004 disappearance. Cameras returned to the road, the rest stop, the marsh that had become shorthand for fear. The community watched again, bracing for answers that might never come. Elena's family was notified privately, then left alone to wait publicly. Waiting had become muscle memory. Her mother said nothing to reporters this time. She stood at the edge of the taped-off site once, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the dirt as if it might look back. The suspect was brought in again, this time under a different pretext. He arrived flanked by counsel, posture stiff, jaw set. When told about the remains, he showed no reaction at all. That, too, was a reaction. They asked him about the service road. He said he'd never been there. They asked him about plastic sheeting. He said lots of people used plastic. They asked him about 2004, about nights and roads and rest stops. He asked for a break. The interview ended with nothing signed, nothing said. But outside the room, something shifted. The case had crossed a line. It was no longer just about absence. It was about concealment. Someone had taken time. Someone had chosen a place that wouldn't be disturbed for years. Someone had believed, wrongly, that the land would cooperate forever. Investigators reconstructed the area, as it had been 2 decades earlier. They matched tire tracks from old aerials, traced where vehicles could pull off unseen. The service road aligned with a pattern they'd missed before, a quiet artery connecting rest stops and back routes, used by maintenance crews and no one else. Used by people who knew where not to be seen. The suspect's employment history lit up again. Summer 2004. Temporary contract. Access to service roads. Access to plastic. Access to time. Still, the bones refused to speak clearly. Without identification, the prosecutor hesitated. They pushed for more testing, more certainty. Winter turned to spring. The lab tried again, coaxing what it could from what remained. A mitochondrial sequence hinted at a match to Elena's maternal line, but hinted was not enough. Defense would tear it apart. Reasonable doubt waited eagerly. The task force faced a familiar edge. Push now and risk collapse, or wait and risk nothing changing at all. Then the phone rang. It was a jailhouse call, routed through an informant who knew how to listen. A man, arrested on unrelated charges, claimed his cellmate had been talking in his sleep. Names. Roads. A woman's name spoken once, slurred, unmistakable. Elena. The cellmate was not the suspect. He was someone adjacent, someone smaller, someone who'd lived briefly with the suspect years ago. A friend. A helper. Or a witness who'd learned too late the cost of proximity. Detectives moved fast. They interviewed the cellmate under fluorescent lights that made everyone look guilty. He denied talking in his sleep. Then he admitted he'd heard things back then. He said the suspect had come home late one night, clothes muddy, angry in a quiet way. He said there had been plastic in the garage. He said he'd been paid to forget. The story wavered, bent under questioning, but it didn't break. It aligned with places, with dates, with things the cellmate couldn't have known unless he'd been there. It wasn't a confession. It was corroboration, the thin kind that builds slowly, dangerously. Armed with that, the task force returned to the prosecutor. This time, the conversation lasted longer. This time, the word indictment entered the room and stayed. The suspect was arrested on a cool morning that felt unreal after so much heat. No cameras. No spectacle. Just cuffs and a car and a door closing. The charge was cautious, precise. Kidnapping. Evidence tampering. Not murder. Not yet. The community exhaled and held its breath at the same time. Relief tangled with fear. An arrest is not an answer. It is a beginning, and beginnings are fragile. In court filings, details surfaced that had never been public. The flickering light. The service road. The plastic. Each revelation sharpened the outline of a night that had lived too long as rumor. The defense responded with confidence, dismantling timelines, attacking witnesses, reminding everyone that bodies tell stories better than fragments do. Elena's name filled the courtroom, spoken carefully, reverently. Her photo sat on a table, unchanged while everyone else had aged around it. The judge listened. The jury would come later. For now, the case hovered in a liminal space, neither solved nor silent. Outside, the road kept humming. Trucks passed the rest stop without slowing. The marsh shifted under the sun. Florida did what it always did, absorbed history and kept moving. But something fundamental had changed. The silence that began in 2004 had been interrupted, not broken, but challenged. Someone had finally said, out loud, that the land had not swallowed the truth completely. Whether the truth would stand in court was another question. Whether Elena's story would ever be fully told remained uncertain. What mattered, for now, was that the night no longer whispered alone. It had been answered, tentatively, imperfectly, by voices that refused to stop listening. Courtrooms have their own weather. A pressure system built from breath and expectation, from the scrape of chairs and the low murmur that never quite stops. When the suspect was led in for the first major hearing, the air shifted. Not because answers were about to arrive, but because denial had finally been given a stage. The defense went first, as defenses always do, slicing the narrative into manageable pieces. No body. No eyewitness. No confession. A case stitched together from coincidence and hindsight. They spoke calmly, confidently, the way people do when they want doubt to feel reasonable. They reminded the room that Florida soil eats evidence, that memory degrades, that desperation can make patterns where none exist. They said Elena Morales deserved truth, not a convenient ending. The prosecution listened and waited. They had learned patience from the case itself. When it was their turn, they didn't argue the absence. They framed it. They talked about control again, but this time they anchored it in specifics: access to service roads, familiarity with rest stops, plastic sheeting purchased in cash, a phone taken and kept. They talked about behavior that repeated across years and places, about a man who lived lightly and left little behind, about choices that pointed in one direction even when footprints didn't. They showed the jury the map. The corridor. The rest stop. The marsh. The service road. They let the geography tell part of the story, let the distances shrink on the screen until coincidence felt crowded. Elena's family sat together, hands folded, eyes forward. They had learned not to flinch at names or dates. They had learned how to exist in rooms where their grief was evidence adjacent. When Elena's photo appeared on the screen, her mother closed her eyes, just for a moment, as if to hold something back. Witnesses followed, one by one, each carrying a fragment of a night that refused to settle. The retired dispatcher spoke about the call she couldn't forget, her voice steady until it wasn't. The forensic analyst explained fibers and probabilities, careful to never promise more than science could give. The fisherman described the weight on his line, the way it felt wrong before it came free. Then the cellmate took the stand. He was not impressive. He did not look like a turning point. He looked like a man who had made too many bad choices and learned too late how expensive silence could be. He spoke about the summer of 2004, about a garage that smelled like chemicals, about plastic folded and unfolded too carefully to be nothing. He spoke about money handed over without explanation, about a warning delivered without words. The defense dismantled him with practiced ease. Criminal record. Incentive to lie. Memory shaped by time and fear. The jury watched, attentive, undecided. The truth, when it arrived, would have to fight for space. Outside the courtroom, the story grew louder. Commentators took sides. Podcasts dug in. Online forums resurrected old rumors and stitched them into new certainties. Some declared the case solved. Others called it a witch hunt. Elena's name trended and faded and trended again, a cycle of attention that felt both helpful and cruel. Behind the scenes, the task force kept working, because cases don't stop just because court has started. They revisited old storage units tied to the suspect, places rented briefly and abandoned. In one, beneath a false floor panel warped by humidity, they found a box sealed with tape that had yellowed but not failed. Inside, nothing dramatic. No weapon. No trophy. Just notebooks. Lists. Dates. Routes. Notes about lights that flickered and times traffic thinned. It wasn't a diary. It was logistics. The handwriting matched samples taken years earlier. The dates clustered around the disappearances that had begun to rhyme. One page, torn and creased, listed exits along the corridor, including the one nearest Elena's rest stop. Another noted tied times. Another mentioned phones, off, remove battery, written like a reminder to self. The discovery didn't explode into public view. Warrants sealed it in quiet. Prosecutors weighed how and when to introduce it, knowing the defense would argue obsession, fantasy, planning without action. But planning is its own kind of truth. It shows intent even when outcomes remain disputed. The judge allowed portions into evidence. The jury leaned in. The defense objected. The objections were overruled. The weather in the room shifted again. As the trial progressed, time compressed. Days blurred into each other. Testimony led until the story felt heavy enough to bend perception. Jurors took notes, crossed things out, stared at the ceiling during breaks. They were being asked to decide what absence meant. Elena's car became a focal point, a small universe of choices. Experts argued about transfer and removal, about how much force it would take to tear upholstery without leaving obvious damage, about how water could carry fabric miles downstream. The jury learned how much can happen without witnesses, how violence doesn't always announce itself. The defense offered an alternative narrative, clean and plausible. Elena left voluntarily. She met someone she trusted. She traveled. The shoe and fabric were coincidences shaped by time and weather. The cellmate lied. The notebooks were fantasies. Reasonable doubt, assembled carefully, brick by brick. The prosecution countered with one last piece that had arrived too late for the opening statements, but just in time for impact. A partial DNA profile from the fabric, previously uninterpretable, had been run through a newly expanded database. It didn't match the suspect directly. It matched someone related to him, a cousin, arrested years later for an unrelated offense. Familial DNA is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout. It suggests. It narrows the world. The courtroom held its breath as the analyst explained the statistics, the likelihoods, the careful language of science. The defense objected again. The judge allowed it with limits. The jury absorbed it, eyes flicking from screen to defendant. The suspect did not react. Closing arguments arrived like storms. The defense urged caution, warned against the seduction of narrative. The prosecution urged courage, reminded the jury that justice sometimes asks people to see what isn't neatly packaged. They spoke Elena's name one last time, and let it hang in the air. Deliberations began. Hours passed. Then days. The community waited the way it had learned to wait, tightly, quietly, with expectations turned down to avoid disappointment. When the verdict came, it was not the word anyone wanted. It was not guilty on the kidnapping charge. Guilty on evidence tampering. Not guilty on others. A partial truth that satisfied no one completely and angered many. The suspect was sentenced to years, not decades. Enough to mark him. Not enough to close the story. Elena's family stood in the hallway afterward, cameras hovering at a respectful distance that felt anything but. Her sister spoke again, voice controlled, eyes steady. "This isn't the end," she said. It never was. And she was right. Because even as the courtroom emptied, the case refused to settle. Appeals were filed. New tips trickled in, emboldened by the trial's revelations. Another family came forward, seeing echoes they could no longer ignore. The notebooks suggested routes beyond Florida, dates that extended past 2004. The corridor widened. The reopened case had become something larger than itself, a lens through which other silences could be examined. Task forces compared notes. Databases cross-referenced. Patterns sharpened. Elena Morales remained at the center of it, a fixed point in a moving map. Her disappearance had cracked something open, and what spilled out could not be put back. Years later, the service road would be paved. The marsh would shift again. The rest stop lights would finally be replaced. Travelers would come and go, unaware of the layers beneath their tires. But the story would not leave. It lived in court transcripts and evidence boxes, in the memory of a dispatcher's notebook and a fisherman's line, in the quiet certainty of a family that knew absence could be proven even when answers could not. Florida, 2004, had whispered a question into the dark. 20 years on, the question still echoed, not because it lacked an answer, but because the answer, once found, refused to stay simple. A verdict, even an incomplete one, changes the shape of a case. It pulls certain doors shut and leaves others cracked, just enough to let new air in. After sentencing, the courthouse emptied, but the work did not stop. It rarely does. What followed was quieter, more surgical, a phase where headlines faded and details took over. The suspect was moved to a state facility far from the corridor, a place designed to erase individuality through routine. Intake photos showed a man diminished, shoulders sloped, eyes dulled by fluorescent light. Prison does not make people honest, but it does change what they fear. Detectives understood that. They waited. They also followed the notebooks. Logistics has a smell to it, a dryness that doesn't belong to fantasy. Routes were measured in minutes. Notes referenced weather, traffic density, shift changes. This was not obsession scribbled in the dark. This was planning. And planning, once exposed, tends to point outward. Analysts plotted the dates against missing persons databases nationwide. Not just women. Not just Florida. Anyone who vanished near transit corridors, whose vehicles were found intact, whose phones went dark at the wrong moment. The map lit up in places no one liked to look at too closely. Texas. Georgia. Alabama. A handful of cases from the Carolinas. Most had been dismissed early. Voluntary disappearance. Domestic issues. No evidence of foul play. Families left with a silence that sounded familiar. Too familiar. Task forces began talking to each other the way they hadn't before. Not formally. Not yet. But files were shared. Names were compared. Patterns debated. The suspects' movements over the years were reconstructed with painful precision: rental agreements, short-term jobs, traffic citations that placed him just close enough to matter. In prison, the suspect stayed quiet. He filed appeals. He wrote letters to no one. He avoided trouble, a man conserving energy. That alone was notable. People with nothing to hide often make noise. People who are waiting do not. The first crack came from somewhere unexpected. A corrections officer, new to the job and still unguarded by cynicism, reported something odd. During a routine cell inspection, the suspect had reacted sharply to a book found on another inmate's bunk, a true crime paperback about an unsolved highway disappearance. The officer said the man froze, then asked a single question before catching himself. Did they ever find her? The question was logged. It joined a growing file of moments that didn't mean anything alone and meant everything together. Psychologists consulted on the case offered a familiar assessment. Control. Compartmentalize an ability to wait. They warned against expecting confession. People like this did not confess to relieve guilt. They confessed to regain control of a narrative slipping away. So detectives adjusted their strategy. They didn't ask about Elena. They asked about other cases. Hypotheticals. Stories framed as curiosity. They let silence stretch. They let the suspect talk about roads, about travel, about how easy it used to be to disappear before cameras learned how to see. One afternoon, after months of nothing, he said something that landed wrong. He mentioned a rest stop that was not part of the public record. Not Elena's. Another one. Hundreds of miles away. A place tied to a disappearance the task force had only recently connected, a case from 2006 that had never made national news. The room went still. Detectives did not react. They let him keep talking. He described the lighting there. The angle of the lot. How sound carried near the trees. Details, again, that had never been released. When he realized what he was doing, he stopped. He smiled. He asked for water. The interview ended minutes later. Within weeks, investigators were standing on new ground, another strip of asphalt bordered by brush and shadow. The geography matched the notebooks. The timing matched the suspect's movements. And beneath a stand of trees that had grown wild since 2006, the dogs alerted. This time, the ground told a clearer story. They found remains. More complete. More cooperative. Identification came faster. The woman had a name, a family that had been waiting without knowing why. The cause of death could finally be spoken out loud. The case broke open. Media scrambled to catch up. Possible serial offender linked to multiple highway disappearances, the headlines read, cautious but electric. The suspect was transferred again, placed under stricter supervision. His lawyer released a statement denying everything, calling it coincidence amplified by hysteria. But coincidences do not stack like this. They do not share handwriting. They do not follow the same exits. Elena's case, once isolated, now sat at the center of something larger and darker. Her disappearance was no longer just a tragedy waiting for resolution. It was a starting point. For her family, the shift was dizzying. Vindication tangled with grief. Knowing that her case had mattered enough to illuminate others did not lessen the ache. It sharpened it. Elena had been first, or close to it. She had not been alone. Prosecutors moved carefully, aware that momentum could collapse if rushed. New indictments were drafted. Old convictions were revisited. The notebooks were re-examined line by line, each note now read with fresh context. In prison, the suspect's demeanor changed. He stopped smiling. He stopped asking questions. He began requesting legal materials at odd hours, filing motions that went nowhere. Control was slipping, and with it, patience. The final interview came without warning. Detectives arrived one morning and asked him if he wanted to talk. He did not hesitate. He did not ask for a lawyer. That alone was an answer. He spoke for hours, but not about Elena. Not directly. He spoke about roads and noise and timing. About how people underestimate the dark. About how easy it is to mistake opportunity for fate. He framed everything as theory, as observation, as commentary on a world that didn't pay attention. Near the end, he paused. He said one name. Just one. Elena. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The room understood the weight of it. The confession, if it could be called that, was incomplete and infuriating. It named no locations. It offered no apology. But it broke the last wall of denial. Coupled with the new evidence, it was enough. Charges followed. More trials. More families learning words they had waited years to hear. Some cases closed cleanly. Others remained open, stubborn as ever. Elena's case, finally, shifted categories. No longer missing. No longer unsolved. Resolved, on paper, with an asterisk that would never go away. The corridor remained. Roads do not care what happened on them. They keep doing what they were built to do, carry people forward. But for those who knew the story, every rest stop became a reminder. Every flickering light a question answered too late. Florida, 2004, had whispered once. Now, years later, the whisper had grown into a chorus, uneven and incomplete, but loud enough to be heard. And in that sound lived the truth of the case, not neat, not finished, but finally, undeniably real. Resolution is a word people trust too easily. It sounds like rest. It sounds like an ending. But inside investigations, resolution often feels more like a door slammed in a long hallway, one room closed, dozens still echoing. After the suspect spoke Elena's name, after charges expanded and headlines stretched to fit the scope of it all, the machinery of justice accelerated in ways that felt both necessary and cruelly late. Paperwork multiplied. Jurisdictions negotiated like uneasy neighbors. Evidence traveled in sealed containers between labs that spoke different procedural languages. Every new case tied to the suspect had to be built from the ground up, as if no one had learned anything the first time. Prosecutors argued over order. Which family deserved answers first? Which jury could carry the weight without buckling? The suspect watched it unfold from a cell designed to neutralize men like him. He stopped cooperating. Silence returned, thicker this time, defensive. His earlier words, roads, timing, darkness, were parsed and reparsed by analysts hungry for meaning. They treated his language like a code, each metaphor a possible map. Most of it led nowhere. Some of it didn't. One phrase lingered, water remembers. He'd said it casually, almost fondly, while describing how landscapes change. Investigators circled the words like birds. Florida water remembers everything. It carries. It buries. It reveals when it wants to. They returned to the marsh again, not because they expected miracles, but because the case demanded thoroughness. New technology scanned deeper, read disturbances older methods missed. The land, already cut and reshaped by storms, resisted interpretation. But near an inlet previously dismissed as too unstable, the ground responded. This time, they found what had been missing for 20 years. The recovery was slow. Painfully so. Each fragment catalogued, each motion deliberate. When the lab confirmed identity, there was no fanfare. No announcement. Just a series of phone calls that changed lives in a quiet, irreversible way. Elena Morales was no longer missing. The cause of death could not be stated with the confidence people wanted, but the story it told was clear enough. Violence. Intent. The absence of accident. The absence of choice. Her family received the news in a private room, with bad lighting and chairs that had seen too many versions of this moment. Her mother cried without sound. Her sister asked practical questions she already knew the answers to. What happens now? How long? What do we do? What they did was plan a funeral 20 years late. The service was small, intentionally so. The people who came were the ones who had stayed. No cameras. No speeches designed for anyone outside the room. Just names spoken, memories shared, a life reclaimed from abstraction. Closure did not arrive. Something quieter did. A sense that Elena was no longer suspended in that night on the road. Outside the family, the case continued to metastasize. Other jurisdictions finalized charges. Some defendants pled quickly, their courage evaporating under the weight of pattern and proof. Others fought, clinging to the hope that doubt might still be manufactured. Trials followed, uneven and exhausting. The suspect became a central figure in a story that now belonged to many families, not just one. In each courtroom, Elena's name appeared as context, as origin, as the first thread pulled loose. Prosecutors spoke it carefully, aware that she had become something symbolic without ever consenting to it. She was no longer just a victim. She was evidence of escalation. The suspect's defense shifted tone. Gone was the calm dismissal. In its place came fragmentation, claims of coercion, of misunderstood statements, of notebooks taken out of context. They argued that planning was not action, that proximity was not guilt, that silence could not be convicted. Juries disagreed. One by one, verdicts landed. Guilty. 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 Each time, the suspect absorbed the word differently, sometimes with anger, sometimes with indifference, once with a smile that vanished when the judge spoke, sentencing ranges measured in decades. The totality of it ensured he would never walk free again. That knowledge brought relief, but it also brought a reckoning. How had he moved so freely for so long? How had the corridor allowed it? How many signs had been missed, because they didn't scream loudly enough? Law enforcement agencies issued reports heavy with hindsight. They revised protocols. They trained officers to see patterns earlier, to share data faster, to treat disappearances near transit spaces with new urgency. None of it changed 2004. All of it changed what came after. For Elena's family, the public reckoning was exhausting. They attended hearings when they could, avoided them when they couldn't. They learned to say no. They learned that being the beginning of a story did not obligate them to relive it forever. Still, reminders arrived uninvited. A podcast host requested an interview, promising sensitivity. A production company asked for rights they did not have. Strangers sent letters thanking Elena for helping solve other cases, as if gratitude could substitute for time. The family declined, again and again, until silence became its own defense. Detective Hale attended the funeral from the back. He did not speak. He did not approach the family. He stood long enough to see the casket lowered, long enough to feel the weight lift and settle somewhere else. When he left, he drove the corridor one last time and did not stop. The rest stop lights had been replaced by then. Lead, steady, unforgiving. The trees had been trimmed back. The marsh redirected. Travelers paused and moved on, unaware of how intentional those changes were, how much effort had gone into making the place feel safe again. But safety is not a permanent condition. It is an agreement renewed daily by attention. In academic circles, the case became a reference point. Papers were written about transitional space predation, about offender patience, about how control masquerades as calm. Elena's name appeared in footnotes and case studies, a line between theory and blood. The suspect never offered a full confession. He never explained why Elena, why that night, why the rest stop. In letters to the court, he framed himself as misunderstood, as a product of opportunity and neglect. He denied cruelty even as evidence stacked higher than denial could reach. In one letter, he wrote that the road made him who he was. That anonymity was a kind of permission. That people gave away their safety without realizing it. The judge did not respond. Years passed again, but differently now. The case stopped haunting the news cycle and settled into record. Elena's name appeared less often, but when it did, it was attached to action, policy changes, training modules, scholarships established quietly in her honor by people who had known her smile. Her sister returned to the diner once, sat in the same booth, ordered the same coffee. She stayed long enough to remember the version of herself that still believed home soon meant something guaranteed. When she left, she did not look back. Florida kept moving. It always does. Hurricanes rewrote coastlines. New highways cut through old land. The corridor expanded, lanes added, exits renamed. Progress layered itself over memory like fresh paint. But memory does not dissolve so easily. At night, when traffic thinned and insects filled the air, the road still felt charged to those who knew. Charged with what had been taken, and what had been learned too late. Charged with the knowledge that silence is never empty, only waiting. Elena Morales had been missing. Then she had been evidence. Then she had been a catalyst. Now, finally, she was a person again, named, mourned, remembered without speculation. The case that began with a whisper ended without one. No final words. No neat moral. Just a long, uneven arc bending toward accountability. And somewhere beneath the asphalt and the lights and the traffic reports, Florida remembered. After the verdicts settled and the corridors quieted, a different kind of work began, the kind no one televises, the kind that unfolds in offices with bad coffee and better intentions. The case had changed the language of disappearances, and language has consequences. Reports were rewritten. Training manuals updated. The phrase voluntary missing lost some of its casual authority. Too many families had learned how final that phrase could feel. Elena's case became a reference not because it was sensational, but because it was instructive. Investigators talked about the pause, those moments when officers hesitate to call something what it might be. They talked about transitional spaces, about how predators prefer places that belong to no one and everyone at once. Rest stops. Parking lots. Corridors. Places designed to move people along quickly, not protect them. The corridor itself was audited, mile by mile. Cameras went up where none had been before. Lighting plans were redesigned with psychology in mind, not aesthetics. Sight lines mattered. Shadows mattered. The idea was not to eliminate danger, that was a fantasy, but to reduce opportunity, to make waiting harder. Waiting had always been the suspect's advantage. In prison, stripped of anonymity, he lost interest in explanations. He filed few emotions. He stopped asking questions. He aged quickly, the way men do when their defining behaviors are no longer possible. Control had been replaced by routine. Routine is a poor substitute. Once, during a mandatory evaluation, he said something that didn't make it into any report. The psychologist remembered it later, not because it was dramatic, but because it was small. He said he hated how quiet it was now. Not the noise existed, but the predictability. He said the road had been louder in his head. The road had always been loud. People just hadn't known how to listen. Families connected by the broader case began finding each other, cautiously at first, then with a confidence forged in shared understanding. They compared notes not to relive pain, but to anchor it. To say, this happened. This mattered. You are not alone in remembering. They gathered once a year, informally, in places that felt neutral, parks, community centers, a rented room at a library. No banners. No media. Just names spoken in rooms that respected silence. Elena's name was often first, not out of hierarchy, but chronology. She was the beginning of the thread they all held. Her sister attended when she could. Other years, she sent flowers and stayed home. Grief had become more private as answers had become more public. She learned that closure is not a door that closes, but a room you stop rearranging. For law enforcement, the case continued to teach long after it stopped producing headlines. Younger detectives were taught to distrust convenience, to resist narratives that arrived too easily. They were taught that absence is a form of presence, that missing evidence is still evidence. They were taught Elena's case the way doctors teach anatomy, carefully, respectfully, with an emphasis on what happens when systems fail to communicate. Some departments implemented something simple and radical, mandatory second looks. Any disappearance near a transit corridor triggered a review by an external unit after 30 days, no matter how ordinary it seemed. It slowed things down. It saved time later. Not every case benefited. Some still vanished into weather and paperwork. But fewer did. Years passed. New cases replaced old ones in the public imagination. The corridor became just another stretch of road again, its reputation softened by time and infrastructure. People forgot why certain lights were brighter, why certain exits felt watched. Forgetting is a kind of success, even if it feels uneasy. Elena's mother moved houses. She kept fewer things. She donated clothes that had waited too long for a body that never returned whole. She spoke Elena's name less often out loud, but thought it more clearly. Memory had shifted from ache to weight, a constant, but manageable. On the anniversary of the day Elena disappeared, she drove the corridor once, alone. She did not stop at the rest area. She did not slow down. She passed through like the night had once demanded and the morning had denied. When she reached the other side, she pulled over and cried, not for what had happened, but for the version of the future that had never been allowed to exist. The case found its way into textbooks, stripped of names, reduced to lessons. Subject selected victims in transitional spaces. Offender demonstrated patience and planning. Early intervention indicators overlooked. The language was clean. It had to be. But those who taught it added pauses, moments where they said her name anyway, softly, as a reminder that theory comes from loss. Once, years later, a junior investigator asked a senior one how you live with cases like that. How you carry them without letting them hollow you out. The answer came without hesitation. You don't carry the case. You carry the person. The case ends. The person doesn't. Elena's story did not end where it might have if the shoe had never surfaced, if the notebook had never been found, if a man had never said a name in a room designed to absorb truth. It ended with accountability that arrived late and incomplete, the only kind that sometimes exists. It ended with changes that would never know her face. It ended with memory refusing to dissolve. The suspect died in custody years later, quietly, of causes unrelated to violence. The news item was small, unadorned. No families attended. No statements were issued. For some, it felt like relief. For others, like theft, another ending taken without consent. For Elena's family, it was neither. It was simply information. They did not mark the day. What they marked instead were the days Elena had lived, the birthdays that still mattered, the jokes that survived retelling, the habits that echoed in unexpected places. Her sister kept the text message framed now, not as evidence, but as artifact. Home soon. It had never been a promise. It had been a moment. The corridor continues to evolve. Self-driving vehicles test their sensors there now. Cameras watch without blinking. The rest stop has a cafe with bright windows and staff trained to notice when someone lingers too long. Signs remind travelers to stay alert, to trust their instincts, to ask for help. They are practical signs, not memorials. But sometimes, at night, when the traffic thins and the insects return to their static chorus, the place feels charged again. Not haunted. Remembered. As if the land itself learned something and refuses to forget. Florida has always been a place where stories slip between water and heat, where the line between vanishing and being erased is thin. Elena Morales crossed that line once, unwillingly. She crossed it back through the persistence of people who refused to accept silence as an answer. The case that began as a whisper ended as a warning, not loud, not theatrical, but steady. Pay attention. Look twice. Don't mistake ordinary for safe. And if you find yourself on a road at night, paused between destinations, remember that someone once stood there too, trusting the dark for just a moment. Remember that moments matter. Remember that silence is never empty. It is waiting. Time did not close the case. It thinned it, stretched it, pulled it into places no one expected. Long after the courtroom emptied and the suspect's name faded from headlines, the disappearance kept working its way through the system like a fault line, quiet but active, shifting pressure beneath ordinary days. Detectives who had never met Elena began to feel they knew her. Not her face's blur, but her absence, the shape it left behind. There were nights when officers on patrol slowed instinctively near rest areas, scanning faces, posture, hands. Training had sharpened their eyes, but something else lingered too, a memory of what happens when hesitation outpaces instinct. Radios crackled. Tires hissed over asphalt still warm from the day. Florida breathed around them, humid and indifferent. Across the state, other families listened differently now when the news said missing. They heard what wasn't said. They heard time slipping. Some called departments earlier. Some refused to wait the prescribed hours. Elena's case had taught them that urgency is not hysteria. It is arithmetic. The archives filled with new data. Analysts cross-referenced transit disappearances, plotted dots that once seemed random. Patterns emerged slowly, the way stars do when the light pollution fades. Certain exits. Certain hours. Certain weather conditions that kept witnesses inside cars, windows up, eyes forward. The science of absence advanced by degrees. But science could not explain the dreams. Elena appeared in them, not as a victim, not as a ghost, but as a presence. Standing at the edge of vision. Watching roads stretch and bend. In the dreams of her sister, Elena never spoke. She didn't need to. The silence carried enough. Grief counselors call this integration. The mind-making room. The heart learning how to beat around a wound. It doesn't feel clinical from the inside. It feels like carrying someone quietly through a crowd, careful not to lose them again. In the evidence room, the box labeled with Elena's name remained sealed but not forgotten. It held things that would never testify again, fibers too common to isolate, soil samples indistinguishable from 100 miles of Florida earth, photographs that captured everything except the moment that mattered most. The box was audited once a year, logged, returned to its shelf. A ritual of respect. Once, during a late shift, a detective opened it anyway. Not for procedure. For proximity. He studied the contents like a language he hoped to learn fluently enough to speak to the past. He closed the lid gently, as if not to wake anything. Outside the system, the story mutated the way all stories do. Podcasts retold it with varying degrees of care. Some focused on the predator, polishing his infamy until it shone. Others kept the lens where it belonged, on the small choices that accumulate into catastrophe. Listeners argued. Comments filled with theories, accusations, confidence masquerading as insight. The family did not listen. They had learned that speculation is a second disappearance, one that happens in public, again and again. They guarded Elena's story the way you guard a flame from wind, not hiding it, but shielding it. Years blurred. Technology sprinted ahead. Facial recognition improved. License plate readers multiplied. Algorithms promised foresight. And still, people vanished. Not in the same way, not on the same roads, but close enough to remind everyone that progress is not immunity. When another disappearance occurred near the corridor, brief, resolved within hours, the response was immediate, coordinated, loud. Roadblocks. Alerts. A suspect stopped before the line could be crossed. The rescued woman hugged a deputy, so hard his vest creaked. She kept saying the same thing, over and over. I thought no one would notice. They noticed. The news credited reforms. Officials referenced cases, plural now, but one hovered behind the words like a watermark. Elena's name wasn't spoken. It didn't have to be. In quieter corners of the internet, people who had known the suspect dissected their memories. The odd comment. The missed look. The unease explained too late. Guilt pooled and evaporated in cycles. The truth settled into something simpler and harder: evil does not announce itself. It waits for permission, and permission often looks like distraction. The suspect's cell was reassigned. His belongings boxed and stored, then discarded. No one wanted souvenirs. The prison returned to routine. New men filled old spaces. Violence found other expressions. The system absorbed the loss without comment. For Elena's sister, the years marked themselves by different measures. The height of her children against door frames. The sound of laughter that arrived without warning. The way Joy learned to coexist with the knowledge that it was incomplete. She stopped asking why some lives continue and others fracture. The question never paid rent. Once, while cleaning, she found an old map Elena had folded and refolded until the creases were soft. Routes highlighted. Stops circled. Dreams penciled in margins. She sat on the floor and traced the lines with her finger, imagining motion, imagining arrival. She did not cry. She folded the map again, and placed it in a drawer she opened often. The corridor received a new name on a planning document, something neutral and administrative. Names changed to manage memory. The asphalt didn't care. It held the same heat. It reflected the same headlights. It carried the same risk and the same promise: movement. Late one night, a trucker pulled over at the rest stop, exhausted beyond caution. As he stepped out, he noticed a woman sitting alone, phone dead, keys locked in her car. He hesitated, then remembered a training video he half-watched years ago. He kept his distance. He called for help. He waited where others could see him. Nothing happened. And that was everything. The woman drove away an hour later, shaken but safe. The trucker finished his route. Neither knew Elena's name. Neither needed to. Her absence had done its work. Memory is not loud. It doesn't shout warnings. It changes behavior quietly, the way gravity changes paths. It bends decisions just enough to matter. On the anniversary of the reopening, a small article ran in a local paper. No photos. No quotes from officials. Just a timeline and a line at the end. The case continues to influence missing persons protocols statewide. Influence is an invisible metric. It doesn't comfort at night. It doesn't replace a voice. But it keeps others from falling through the same gap. Elena's mother no longer drove the corridor. She chose routes with trees, with towns, with places to stop where people lingered. She said it was about scenery. It was about sound. Roads with voices felt safer. In her living room, a photo sat on a shelf, not from the last year, not from the worst day, but from a moment in between. Elena laughing, unguarded, the future still intact. Visitors noticed it because it felt alive. They asked about it. The mother told them who Elena was, not what happened to her. The difference mattered. As the years stacked, the case slipped from present tense to something more complicated. Not past. Not resolved. A constant conditional. If you are here. If you are listening. If you remember. Some nights, when storms rolled and fast and loud, people swore the corridor sounded different, as if the wind carried fragments of other traffic, other moments. It was just weather, of course. Florida is generous with drama. But stories attach themselves to places that earn them. Elena earned nothing of what followed her name. And yet her name persists, not as a headline now, but as a hinge, between complacency and care, between passing through and paying attention. The disappearance reopened a door that could not be closed again. On the other side was not peace, but vigilance. Not certainty, but refusal. Refusal to accept that silence means nothing. Refusal to let waiting be mistaken for safety. Refusal to forget that every road is a choice, and every pause can be the difference between vanishing and being seen. The corridor stretches on, as roads do, offering no commentary. Cars pass. Lights blink. People move through the dark carrying lives no one else can see. Somewhere in that flow is the echo of a moment that never finished unfolding. It is not asking to be solved anymore. It is asking to be remembered. The story did not end where people expected it to. It kept leaking into margins, into training rooms, into late-night drives, into the quiet recalibration of instincts that no one admits have changed. Long after Elena's name stopped trending, it continued to function like a low-frequency signal, felt more than heard, altering the way certain places were perceived. The road at night was no longer neutral. It was conditional. Detectives who worked the case learned to recognize a specific kind of silence, the kind that arrives after you think you've heard everything. It's heavier than ignorance. It's the quiet of unanswered questions that refuse to age out. They felt it during routine stops, during interviews that went nowhere, during moments when a witness said, "I didn't think it mattered." That sentence became a trigger. Everything matters, now. The reopening had exposed not just a suspect, but a system of assumptions. Assumptions about who leaves voluntarily. Assumptions about risk. Assumptions about how long someone can be gone before they are considered gone for good. Those assumptions had been efficient. They had also been wrong. Florida is good at hiding things. Water takes evidence. Heat degrades it. Growth covers it. Subdivisions rise where scrub once stood, and suddenly a place where something happened is a cul-de-sac with a mailbox and a lawn chair. Investigators learned to think vertically as well as horizontally. What was here before, what is here now, what has been buried by progress and paperwork. There were secondary sites never fully resolved. Places the suspect mentioned without clarity. Coordinates without confirmation. Searches conducted years too late. Ground disturbed by weather and construction. The language of reports shifted again, inconclusive. A word that carries both honesty and defeat. Families asked about those sites sometimes. Not aggressively. Just enough to signal that hope had learned how to stand without expectations. The answers were careful. No promises. No theatrics. Just facts, and the admission that some answers dissolve before they can be held. Elena's case also changed how time was treated. Cold no longer meant dormant. Dormant suggested rest. This case had never rested. It had waited, yes, but waiting is active when someone refuses to look away. Files were digitized, indexed, made searchable in ways they hadn't been before. Patterns once hidden by filing cabinets emerged under algorithms that didn't care about jurisdictional pride. The algorithms flagged anomalies. Not solutions. Anomalies. Moments where someone should have been seen and wasn't. Moments where a vehicle passed through but never exited. Moments where a call dropped in a place with no reason to drop. Technology didn't solve the case. It sharpened the questions. And questions have weight. In the public imagination, unresolved cases age into mythology. Facts blur. Villains become caricatures. Victims become symbols. Elena's family resisted that transformation quietly, consistently. They corrected small errors when they saw them. They declined invitations that promised exposure without substance. They learned that control, even limited control, was a way to survive. On the road, drivers continued to underestimate pauses. A car stopped on the shoulder still drew curiosity more than concern. Not everyone absorbed the lesson. Not everyone wanted to. Vigilance is tiring. Normalcy is seductive. Once, during a storm thick enough to erase distance, traffic slowed to a crawl near the corridor. A sedan hydroplaned and spun, coming to rest facing the wrong direction. For a moment, nothing happened. Then doors opened. Strangers moved. Phones lit up. Someone stood in the rain to warn approaching cars. No one asked why they'd stopped. They just did. It wasn't heroism. It was reflex. Somewhere in that reflex lived Elena's echo. The investigators, who had been there at the beginning, began to retire. They left behind notes not required by policy, handwritten reminders, underlined phrases, observations that didn't fit neatly into forms. They told replacements which details to respect, which shortcuts not to take, which instincts had been earned the hard way. One detective admitted, years later, that the case had changed how he listened to people. He stopped filling silences. He let them stretch. He learned that what comes after hesitation often matters more than what comes before. Elena's interviews, what little existed of her final day, had taught him that. There were still nights when the corridor made the news. Accidents. Weather. Construction delays. Each headline carried a shadow for those who remembered. Each mention reopened a file in the mind. The road was never just a road again. In a different county, a young officer pulled a driver over for a minor violation. The driver was nervous in a way that didn't match the infraction. The officer remembered a case study from the academy. A woman's disappearance. A rest stop. A hesitation. He asked a second question. Then a third. The situation unraveled. Another person was found alive in the back seat. The report cited training. The training cited precedent. The precedent had a name. Elena's mother read about it in the paper and folded the article without comment. She didn't frame it. She didn't cry. She placed it under the photo on the shelf and went about her day. Some victories are too heavy to celebrate. As years layered themselves, the case became a quiet benchmark. When new disappearances were reported, they were measured against it, not to predict outcomes, but to calibrate response. Faster. Louder. More insistent. Waiting had lost its authority. Yet the unanswered parts remained unanswered. The places never found. The moments never recovered. The final seconds that belonged only to Elena and the dark. Those pieces resisted closure the way certain truths always do. Not because they are hidden, but because they are gone. Philosophers call it the irretrievable. Investigators call it unfinished. Families call it Tuesday. In community meetings near the corridor, officials spoke about safety improvements. Lighting. Cameras. Patrol frequency. Residents nodded. Questions followed about maintenance schedules and funding. Practicalities. Life continuing. Someone always asked about Elena. Not the details. Just her. Officials answered carefully. Respectfully. They had learned that tone matters. The corridor itself absorbed the attention without response. Rain pooled and evaporated. Tires wore grooves into asphalt. Billboards changed faces. The land kept no records. People did. On a humid evening years later, a group of teenagers parked near the rest stop, killing time, music low. One of them wandered too close to the edge of the light and felt something tighten in his chest for no reason he could name. He stepped back. He laughed it off. He suggested they leave. No one argued. Instinct is a quiet inheritance. In archives, Elena's file gained annotations in the margins, citations in academic papers, footnotes in policy reviews. Her disappearance became a reference point in discussions about transitional vulnerability. The language grew precise. The impact remained blunt. The suspect's name appeared less and less. That, too, was intentional. Attention was redirected. Focus shifted from fascination to prevention. From who did this to how it could happen again. Elena's name stayed. The rest receded. Sometimes, late at night, a dispatcher would hear a caller hesitate before giving a location. "I'm not sure where I am," they'd say. The dispatcher would slow their voice, anchor them. Mile markers. Landmarks. Breathing. Getting found before getting lost. Elena had never had that voice on the other end. That absence was a lesson written in negative space. On the anniversary of the disappearance, the family gathered privately. No speeches. No rituals that demanded resolution. They cooked Elena's favorite meal. They told stories that had nothing to do with the case. Laughter was allowed. Silence too. Grief had matured. It no longer needed permission. Outside, the road carried on, as roads do, indifferent and essential. Somewhere, someone checked their mirrors twice. Somewhere, someone chose a different exit. Somewhere, someone noticed a car idling too long and made a call that felt awkward but necessary. These were not coincidences. They were consequences. The reopening of the case had not restored what was lost. It had redistributed responsibility. It had asked the living to be awake in ways they hadn't been before. It had turned a disappearance into a directive. Do not assume. Do not rush past. Do not mistake quiet for safety. Elena Morales did not come home. That truth remains unmoved. But she did not vanish into nothing. She became a pressure point in the collective conscience, a reminder etched into behavior rather than stone. Her story did what unresolved stories sometimes do. It changed the future unevenly, invisibly, one decision at a time. The corridor stretches forward, lit and monitored, carrying people who believe they are alone. They are not. They are surrounded by choices shaped by something that happened once, in the dark, and refused to stay there. The case is not closed in the way people like. It does not end with certainty. It ends with vigilance. With listening. With the understanding that disappearance is not an event, but a process, and that interruption, even late, still matters. The road hums. The night waits. And somewhere between departure and arrival, the memory holds its ground, insisting quietly that attention is the only answer that never expires. By the time the case reached its second decade in public memory, it no longer belonged to a single department or family. It lived in the spaces between them, carried forward by people who had never stood in that rest stop or read the first report, but who nonetheless felt its gravity. The disappearance had matured into something heavier than mystery. It had become a reference point for how quickly ordinary moments can fracture. New investigators learned Elena's case alongside others, but it lingered differently. It refused to compress into bullet points. It resisted neat chronology. The timeline had holes not because of negligence, but because life does not always leave timestamps when it breaks. They were taught to sit with those gaps, to understand that what is missing can shape an investigation as much as what is found. Somewhere along the way, the phrase cold case lost its chill. Cold implied stillness. Elena's case had never stopped moving. It circulated through policy debates, grant proposals, late-night conversations in squad rooms where the lights were too bright and the stakes too abstract. It resurfaced every time someone asked whether a report was worth reopening, whether resources should be spent on something that might never resolve. The answer, more often now, was yes. Florida's geography complicated everything. Swamps swallow sound. Coastal winds scatter scent. Seasonal populations flood areas and vanish again, leaving behind nothing but receipts and half-remembered faces. Elena's disappearance had forced agencies to map not just places, but flows of people, of opportunity, of neglect. The corridor was a spine. Everything else branched from it. Years after the reopening, a review committee identified what they called the first failure. Not the night Elena vanished. Not the missed witness. The first failure had been earlier, quieter. A reluctance to disrupt normalcy. To treat a disappearance as a rupture rather than an inconvenience. That finding circulated widely, not as an indictment, but as a warning. Normalcy protects perpetrators. The families who followed the case learned to recognize when officials spoke in safe language. They learned to listen for what was not promised. They adjusted expectations without surrendering insistence. Advocacy became less emotional and more precise. Dates. Times. Requests that could not be dismissed as grief. Elena's sister became fluent in that precision. She knew which questions unlocked movement, and which closed doors. She learned how to say the same thing 3 different ways until someone heard it. She hated that skill. She kept it anyway. At home, life insisted on continuing. Bills arrived. Children grew. Birthdays stacked up.